Before we can provide our intended viewer with a working real-time walkthrough, we need to make sure it's going to work flawlessly. The first tool in your disposal for debugging and testing your environment is the message log. If it's not already up, you'll find the message log under Window, Developer Tools, and then under Log. Here in the message log, you'll find all of the errors and warning messages you need to know about your scene. Under lighting results, we have a bunch of warnings. These yellow exclamation points indicate warnings, so they're not really errors, but they're things that you should probably look at fixing. Also, in the viewport, if we click the down arrow next to the word perspective here, first of all, we can enable the show FPS here. So if we turn that on, now we can see the frame rate for my scene. I'm running it at about 120 hertz or 120 frames per second. Each frame is taking about 8 milliseconds, which is great because this is even going to run on a VR headset. You'll also find an extensive array of stats under the Stat menu here. If we'll go over to Advanced or Engine, you're going to find a ton of stuff here. So for instance, under Engine, I can use Detailed Stats, and this is going to give me a real-time graph of the stats, as well as over here telling me how many milliseconds everything is taking. There are also quite a few viewport visualizations to help us debug content. We of course have lit and unlit, but we also have the ability to go to Wireframe Mode. Wireframe Mode is actually more helpful than you might think. This will allow you to debug the density of your meshes. Below this, we have our detail lighting, which shows us lighting and reflections and ambient occlusion. And below that, we can also diagnose just lighting, see what our lighting looks like without any of that extraneous information. Next, we have shader complexity. The cool thing about shader complexity is we have a little bar at the bottom here from good to extremely bad. So you can move around the scene. So most of my scene here is clearly in the good zone for shader complexity. Our materials are not overly complex until you get to these translucent objects, which have things like screen space reflections on them as well. And these are extremely costly objects here. So the last option on view mode is buffer visualizations, and there are a lot of options here to look at. We're not going to cover them all, but we'll look at a couple of them. First of all, we have material ambient occlusion, which we're not using any, but if you had any ambient occlusion maps inside of your materials, you would see them using this option. We also have metallic here, so we can see every metallic option in our scene. With metallic, we can see every material in our scene that has the metallic component applied to it. Likewise, we can see roughness. So these are all the roughness values of our scene. So here we can see the chrome sphere has a roughness value of 0 and the gray ball has a roughness value of 1. Under the show menu, we have a couple of interesting options. So we go down to show and then developer. We can enable gbuffer hints to get some idea of what our materials are doing. So with gbuffer hints, you can see the indicators up here say that yellow materials are unrealistic and they are 100% black, which you will never find in nature. So in this case, this oven here has a black component to the material, making it something we might want to tweak. You'll also find some options under the window menu. First of all, we have the statistics window. So we'll pull that up. Now in here, you have a lot of things that you can look at that are going to tell you about the amount of memory that's being taken up and a few other things. So for instance, we're in the light building info. This can be enabled when you go to your build settings drop down here. You can turn on show lighting stats and it will collect the information every time you do a light map bake. So we can see here we have lighting time, unmapped texels, unmapped texel memory, total texel memory, and these options here. So for lighting time, this is telling you how long each of these light maps is taking to be calculated. So if I sort this, we can see we've got some that are taking over 800 seconds to bake. If I click on the name here, this will take me to the asset. In this case, it's the floor, which I have a fairly high quality light map on that. As for unmapped texels, we can see here that this object has 96% unmapped texels. That means the light map itself is not being used efficiently. So the UV coordinates for the light map are not taking up enough of the space. So we'll probably want to go in and look at that light map and try to make corrections there. The drop down here allows us to get other information such as primitive stats. Under primitive stats, we can see things like poly counts as well as the amount of memory they're taking up. Then we also have a drop down for static mesh lighting information. And finally, texture stats. And texture stats is going to provide information like the size of the textures, the format, the amount of memory the textures take up, and so forth. Last of all, if we look under the build menu, we'll find a few more options. First of all, you know about show lighting stats. We showed that earlier. But we can also enable error coloring. So when we bake our light maps, it will colorize the light maps to let us know if there are any issues. So I think you'll find you're going to have a ton of options for debugging your content to make sure it runs the best that it can. After you've solved any content issues you have using these debugging tools, it's time to package up your walkthrough and deliver it. There are a few settings you'll want to take a look at though before you package it. You're going to find them all under your project settings. Most of them will be found here under project. First of all, let's go to maps and modes. Right now, this project is set to use the first-person map that comes with the template, but we want to change that to make use of our Epic Interiors map. You'll find under default maps, we can change the editor startup map, and then we have the game default map, and this is the map that will launch when you create your distribution. So we'll change that as well. After this, you want to go to the packaging menu here. We really just want to change one of these options here, and that's build configuration. Right now it's set to development. We want to change that to shipping. Shipping is going to package up everything and cook everything so that it's going to run the fastest without any debugging tools built in or anything that can slow it down. Next up is supported platforms. And here you'll want to check only the platforms that your project supports. So right now it's set up for all platforms. I'm just going to disable that, and then we'll uncheck everything except for desktop and Windows. Below that we have targeted hardware. We want to make sure this is optimized for, in this case, desktop or console maximum quality. All right, so now that we have all our settings, we'll go ahead and save the project, and we're ready to build our package. For that, we'll simply go to File, Package Project, and choose the platform Windows, and in this case we're going to go with Windows 64-bit. I'm going to create a new folder here in my project and just call it Distro. And now Unreal Studio will begin to package the project. Now you've got your real-time walkthrough. Fully tested and built, the last step is to send it off to the client. Congratulations on a job well done. Next up, we'll summarize the topics we've covered in this course, and I'll offer my final thoughts.